Hello everyone, Vivek from Big Brainers here, and today we're going to be talking about some special moves. So I'm going to start off with a quick game, right? I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to let it play, and you're going to try to find out what are some weird moves. So, okay. Did you guys spot any weird moves in there? Because if you did, you're right. There were actually two weird moves. So, two moves that we haven't talked about yet. The first move was this. Like, what is this? A pawn can't take a pawn that's like right there. What? And what was this move right here? They moved their king to this square and this rook just jumped to that side. So, what just happened? Those two moves are called castling, and the other one was called en passant. So I'm going to be explaining each of those moves to you guys. So yeah, let's begin. The first one, castling. So castling is not as bad as it seems. So for castling, all you have to do is basically empty this row between your king and your rook, whether it's this rook you want to castle with or this one. So yeah, there is two types of castling. So you can empty one of these two rows, and there are some conditions. The first rule is you cannot be in check while you're castling. We said we have to have these two rows empty, right? So let's just do something like that, and if it comes in for a check, we can't just, jump here. We can't. We're in check. We're not allowed to castle. So instead, what we can do is just put a piece right in front, and we should be fine. Now, even if they're pinning us, it doesn't matter. If they're pinning this knight, it doesn't matter. We can still castle. So that's the first rule. You cannot be in check. The second rule is you cannot castle if the line between the king and the rook is getting attacked by a piece of the other color. So if we were playing white in this game, right? And black did something like this. So here they went here for some reason. We just didn't happen to see that. We can't castle. We can't. Because this bishop is taking away this square. So all we have to do to stop this bishop from taking this diagonal, this square, is we just block it. And now we can castle. So that is the second rule. You gotta clear it up. Don't let any other opponent pieces attack those squares. And the third rule, the final rule, is you can't castle if your king or rook moves once. So what do I mean by that? If this king goes up for one move, for some reason, you can't castle anymore. Even if you bring your king back towards the original spots, it's already moved. You can't castle anymore. So let me just show you. Here, if we just did something like this, right? And brought the king back and tried to castle this time. So let's say did something weird like that. They can castle, they haven't moved their king, but we, on the other hand, cannot. Remember, don't move your king, or else you can't castle. Same thing applies with the rook. If the rook you want to castle with moves too, then you can't castle with that rook. So here, if we do something like this, right? And you're like, hey, I want to try moving my rook one time. So then you move it up here. Well, guess what? Your king can't castle this way. So if you try going back, it doesn't matter. You can't castle that way. And here, why can't black castle? If you said it because they'd be in check, you're right. The third rule is you can't castle if you move your king or the rook you're castling with. Okay, so now why castle? The reason you want to castle is because castling actually protects your king. So I just want you to think about the definition of castle. The word castle is kind of like a home, right? It makes you think of a house, a big gigantic house, right? And normally in a house you feel safe. So here, that's what this king is trying to do. It's trying to get into its little castle. It's trying to get into its little house so it's safer. So whenever it goes into this little tiny kind of palace, it's got a fortress. It's got 3 pawns and a rook defending it with a knight probably that's going to be there. And it's just nice. you can start attacking this king that's in the center, which is, you see how this pawn is like up here, open? That's not good. That's why we want to castle. It keeps us protected. But we also need to make sure to at least have one of these pawns up. Because then, let's say one of these pieces weren't there, they could do something called a back rank checkmate, which is also kind of a little puzzle, but we usually don't want those. So just after you castle, you might want to try to move this pawn up once, or like give your king some space, because this king needs some breathing room. So I recommend moving this pawn up, not like right after, but whenever you feel like it, whenever you have an extra move and you don't know what to do. There are two types of castling. So I've been showing kingside castling only, but there's also another way. There's another way to castle, and that's with the other rook. So if we keep on developing our pieces, right? This is kingside, right? They go to the king side, and the queen side goes to the queen side. So here, if we continue, right? Right here. The king for white has two options. They can either go these two spots. If you go to G1, your rook jumps to F1, and you've got this castle here. Now, if you decide to go the other way, which is also possible, your king comes to C1 and your rook to D1. So usually I recommend castling kingside, because kingside is a little safer, or it's a little easier to play if you know how to kind of use the kingside. Because with queenside, it's kind of like a race. You see how now that black is going to try to like come in with their pawns and try to attack the fortress while you have to race them on this side? That's why queenside is not always the best for like beginners, but it works out if you really need to do it. So like, let's say they decide to do something like this, right? You move your pawn up or something, or actually you move this pawn up to try to take it out. Here, this kingside isn't a safe castle, so you can go queenside here, and this is perfectly reasonable. Okay? And finally, the second type of move. So actually, yeah, it was castling. So kingside castling is an O-O, and queenside castling is a triple O. En passant is the second move. So en passant, it basically means in passing, but it's just in French. So I don't know how long ago they created this move, but it's a weird move if you don't get it. It deals with pawns, okay? So how do you do en passant? You have to be on the 5th row for white, and you have to be on the 4th row for black with the pawn. It only works with a pawn. So here, if we did something like this weird, right? We're doing some weird moves. This pawn is on the 5th row, so it's allowed to do en passant. The way you do en passant is you basically let your pawn chill out on this 5th rank, right? Or it doesn't matter where. If it's on H5, G5, you know, don't try to force en passant, because that doesn't usually go well. But this is just a move that you can use. It's rarely played, but what happens is black decides to move their pawn twice. So if they move their pawn twice, right? They decide to jump to this square, or they decide to jump to this square. You basically can go underneath that pawn. You can pass them and take. And this only works once. You can only do it on this 5th row. And if they decide to, you know, take it slowly, you can't en passant this pawn anymore. It's too late, because it had 2 moves. You can only do it when it makes its journey from this square to this square in 1 move. So if this pawn decides to go up 2 squares right here, we can just take it. Move up 2 times, we get it. Now let's say we don't want to do it this turn. Well, now it's not an option anymore. We can't en passant now, because it only works on the move right after you pass the pawn. En passant's a weird concept, but you have to be on the other side of the board. So for white, you have to be on the 5th row, and for black, you have to be on the 4th row. And I'm talking about these letters and numbers right here. So you see these numbers? White has to be on the 5th row, their pawn has to be on one of these squares, while black has to be on the 4th row to do en passant. And then what happens is the opponent pawn moves up twice, right next to it, and then all you do is immediately go under it and take it. So yeah, that is the second special move. Very interesting moves, if I do say so myself, but you won't see this as often as you will see castling, because castling is essential. You see en passant like once in a blue moon. Just because you can do it doesn't mean it's always good, so just watch out for that. We're gonna try a game, right? I'm gonna basically quiz you. Can we castle or can we not? Or can we do en passant? So let's begin. Right here, we start off nice and slow. Knight comes out, boom. Okay, you decide, you know what, I don't want to take it, I don't want it. You decide to go up. Right here. Is black allowed to en passant? Yes or no? If you said yes, you're correct. They are allowed to en passant because you moved this pawn up twice and their pawn is on the 4th row. So they can just go right under, take it. So that was the first part. Now let's continue. They keep on moving their pieces. Nice, nice. And then white does something weird, you know. And oh, what was this? Uh-oh, I guess white made a blunder. Take, they take, bishop goes here, knight goes here, bishop goes there. White wants to castle kingside. Can they? She said no. You're right. They can't castle kingside because this bishop is eyeing them. What white can actually do is castle queenside because there's no piece blocking them, right? There's no pieces that are attacking any of these 3 squares, and this king hasn't moved, nor has this rook, so we're fine. We can castle. Well, let's try another one. What about if we go d4, d5, and then knight here, pawn here, take, knight there, bishop there, knight takes, bishop takes the queen, king takes, and then knight decides to go here, bishop goes there, pawn goes here, king goes here, and then queen goes here. So who can castle, black or white? So like, if you were playing as white in this position, right? So let's say black made a move, can white castle? If you said yes, you're correct. They can castle, they can cancel queenside. Now, right here, let's switch the board. Can black castle kingside? If you said yes, that is incorrect. Remember this king moved? So let's just zoom back a bit. Why don't we? Oh, what was this? It said go here and then come back. Well, I mean, the king's already moved, right? So it can't castle. So yeah, this king is just stuck. We cannot castle even if we try to go into the same exact spots. We get to castle only and only when none of these 2 pieces have moved, we're not in check, or any of these 2 squares, or these 3 squares are getting attacked if you're castling queenside. So yeah, that was en passant castling. It's not that bad, it's pretty simple. Castling is something you need to do almost every game because it keeps your king safe. And en passant comes in a blue moon. It's important that you know it so that people can't trick you. Those are the only 2 special moves. If you somehow see your opponent trying to get your queen from like the other side with this rook or something and they call it a special move, you're being tricked, okay? Don't listen to them. So yeah, that's it guys. See ya.